Madam President,
Sergeant at Arms.
we have a distinguished guest joining us today, President of the Adjutants General Association of the United States, Major General Matt Quinn.
Sergeant at Arms, please have our distinguished guest escorted to the head table.
Major General Matt Quinn is the Adjutant General for the state of Montana and the elected President of the Adjutants General Association. He was elected this past June. General Quinn is a veteran of both Operation Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom.
General Quinn.
Well, good morning. I'll tell you, it was fourth grade, and I was there for show and tell. I think I was showing an ant farm with teacher Miss Farnham. And I stuttered and stammered my way through it, and afterwards she said, you know, you may want to think about, as you do a presentation, try to dress for the part. So in fifth grade, I had Miss Dutton, and I brought my brand new Daisy BB gun, and I wore my Roy Rogers vest, and by God, I was bedangled up, and I thought, okay, well, the way to get through a presentation is to look the part and not necessarily read the words the part. So I'm good here today with the exception of having to follow Janet Jackson. I will follow Dun Dunbar any day of the week, but once you get into a Janet Jackson, it's tough to recover from. So Madam President, Mr. Stewart, it's good to have you here. Former Sergeant Major of the Army, Preston, and Chief Anderson, good to have you here as well. Good morning, and thanks for having me to share some thoughts. As the most recent elected president of the Adjutants General Association for all of 2 months, I want to take some time to share the strategic priorities we have established as a body of 54 representing the states, territories, and the District of Columbia. I'm glad to know we have members of the Montana National Guard here who will hopefully have my back, as well as past President Roger Hagan, who continues to be an incredible strong supporter of our National Guard and your enlisted association. So within the Adjutants General Association, we have established five main priorities for the association, with a number of other working topics that a key group of current and former National Guard members will continue to work. The first priority is our full-time manning levels, particularly within the Army National Guard. Here, over the past number of years, the readiness demands for our National Guard, Army and Air, have continued to increase. And yet, we have been unsuccessful trying to tie the increased readiness demands to an increase in the full-time manning needed to support that readiness. The burden of ensuring our units are meeting the readiness requirements has fallen on our traditional senior NCOs and officers, some pulling up to 120 days a year to prepare units for their ready year. We are not keeping the faith to our soldiers and airmen when we recruited them and continue to recruit them under the mantra of 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a summer. Many may recall, as I was overseas in 2003, the famous cardboard sign on some National Guard vehicles in Iraq that said 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, my ass. And they drove around Iraq with that on there. It was not my vehicle. We're beginning to ask how much readiness is too much based upon the model that we are a traditional or drill status Guard force. We as a National Guard want to be all in when this nation needs us, but our DoD brethren and representatives on Capitol Hill have to remember that they are funding us as a traditional-based force with readiness demands approaching a standing military. Number two is duty status reform, and Mr. Stewart has talked about it. The topic of duty status reform and the presentations we initially heard from the Department of Defense sounded very positive. Anytime that our benefits can be equated across the force, that is a good thing. I will tell you at the January last year Council of Governors, our commanders-in-chief were assured there was no degradation of their authorities over the National Guard in the states and no attempt to change the Insurrection Act within, which limits the ability for active duty to deploy within our borders. I sat in the room as a four-star general said to our governors, Governor Walz and Governor Bullock in my case, this is all goodness. When our AGA-US team finally got their hands on the proposed legislation, and again, it is about 900 pages, we found that, in fact, the Insurrection Act limitation had been removed and governors' authorities were greatly diminished. Now, was this an attempt to get us, the National Guard, to look at the goodness in the document? We won't ever know. I will tell you, Mr. Stewart has dedicated himself and his team to allow us to continue to work through that document, through all 900 pages, and allow us to preserve the integrity of the National Guard as you know it. If you had not had a professional force, professional organization committed to keeping the National Guard as we know it, changes would have happened had we not been able to make those changes. Our National Guard would have found the Army ability to mobilize our soldiers as individuals rather than the construct of unit-based mobilizations, which is the way the law currently reads. The President could have ordered the U.S. Army into our state to respond to disasters without first consulting our governor. Now, I don't mean to ring the doom bell. Again, we are making the changes as we see them, but it would have fundamentally changed the National Guard in ways that we would not have recovered from. We have halted work on the bill until it reads as needed to assure equal benefits without amending our National Guard status. Number 3 is National Guard imperatives. If you look back at the last 10 years, there have been repeated attempts within the Department of Defense and Capitol Hill to negatively change the National Guard as we've known it to exist over the last 382 years. As professional organizations representing our National Guard, we must get ahead of these negative proposals and restore our Guard to its status as the combat reserve of the U.S. Army and U.S. Air Force with independent foundations within the 54 states, territories, and the District of Columbia. We cannot let a few who don't respect what we represent change us to what they believe we should look like. Our nation has relied upon our Guard for its freedom for the past 382 years and needs to continue to have its Guard as designed for the next 382 years. Number 4 is meeting the end-strength challenge. Our Army National Guard is not on target this year to meet our end-strength goals. We're currently about 3,300 short of our end-strength mission of 335,500. In the words of General Hokanson, failure to achieve this requirement will likely have immediate repercussions in the form of potential force structure, budget, and full-time manning reductions. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an issue that your tags are working, but we need field-level emphasis on bringing new recruits into our National Guard. AGA-US is asking hard questions about the disparity in benefits between regular Army and the Army National Guard. For instance, Big Army is offering $40,000 enlistment bonuses while we are capped at $20,000. We fully support a strong military and the growth of our U.S. Army to meet our nation's needs, but believe we need equal incentives to grow our combat reserves of the Army and the Air Force. The final top priority concerns the 1993 offsite agreement, which in essence was agreement between the U.S. Army, the Army National Guard, and the U.S. Army Reserves. In that, it was established that the Army National Guard would be the combat reserve of the Army and combat units would be maintained in the Army National Guard. Over time, we've seen attempts by Army Reserve to inch their way back into gaining combat unit formations, and we, your Army National Guard, and the Adjutants General Association are pushing back, demanding that the 1993 agreement be upheld. General Hokanson is working with our new Army Chief of Staff, General McConville, to maintain the agreement. It's the proverbial camel's nose under the tent. Once the U.S. Army Reserves start pulling combat units into their formations, we start degrading the organizational structure that has worked so well for our Army National Guard. Some additional working topics beyond those top 5 that we continue to monitor: MILCON funding, National Guard role in the cyber community, changes to TRICARE, counter-drug funding, and the Space National Guard. So as you hear today, you have 3 professional organizations dedicated to ensuring the soldiers and airmen in the National Guard are best served within the 5 walls of the Pentagon as well as on Capitol Hill. You have EANGUS, the National Guard organization supported by the officers of the National Guard. This incredible organization, EANGUS, representing the best interests of our enlisted members. But you also have the Adjutants General Association of the United States, which was organized for and by the 54 Adjutants General of the states, territories, and District of Columbia. If you think about that for a minute and go back to our top priorities, and I'll add the other working topics, none of those priorities for the Adjutants General Association are focused on matters associated with our position as tags. They are not self-serving interests. Rather, those priorities are born from the absolute resolution of your Adjutants General that our soldiers and airmen, officer and enlisted, and our organizational structure and legal basis is protected from harm. Not one priority nor working matter is designed to enhance the job of your Adjutant General. 3 professional organizations with voluntary membership dedicated to you, the American airman and the American soldier, serving your state and nation. That is a powerful voice on Capitol Hill and within the Pentagon. Final matter that we just sent a letter of 54 to are 3 sections that are found in the Senate version of the 2021 NDAA, and that is 1036, the 2020 NDAA, 1036, 1037, and 1038. 1036 is based upon the ability of the National Guard Bureau to inspect within the states. 1037 says that if an organization within a state is not following rules, laws, or policy, that the federal recognition of that unit, the federal recognition of the soldier or airman, or the federal recognition of the tag can be removed upon the recommendation to the President. 1038 says that the U.S. PFO office within the state will be managed and named and selected entirely by the Chief of the National Guard Bureau. The PFO, which currently is recommended and nominated by the governor, the PFO cannot have worked within that state for the past 3 years. Now, what organization is going to hire the CFO of the organization completely from outside without knowing who that individual is? So the Adjutants General of the 54, Shy 1, wrote a letter 2 weeks ago to the chair and ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee and House Armed Services Committee asking that those 3 provisions be struck. They are not in the House version, they are only in the Senate version. It is language like that that will fundamentally change what our National Guard of the states looks like and how our National Guard of the states are organized and how the fundamental right of a governor to build and organize the organization within their states. We've pushed back on it. It's what your organization does to protect the integrity of this National Guard. Ladies and gentlemen, again, I appreciate you allowing me to be here to speak with you. God bless each and every one of you. Thank you for the service to your state and to this great nation. Thank you all.
Major General Quinn, thank you so much for your comments, for sharing the priorities of the Adjutant General. We really appreciate that information. And thank you so much for being here. Here's
My
our
honor. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So much. Sergeant at Arms, please escort our distinguished guests from the head table.